Smoke filled the streets of Los Angeles. Flames burst out of buildings, consuming everything in its path. People were running out into the streets in a panic, grabbing their most precious possessions. But in the midst of the chaos, he did not run. He was running towards a fire. Keanu Reeves, without hesitation, rushed to the place where everyone was afraid to even look. And there, in hell, he heard a child's cry. The sky over Los Angeles was an eerie shade of orange, the sun barely piercing through the thick, suffocating smoke. The wildfires had been raging for days, consuming everything in their path: mansions, apartment complexes, parks, leaving nothing but scorched earth and ashes. The city, normally alive with neon and constant movement, had transformed into something unrecognizable, a landscape of fear and destruction. Kicking up ash-covered dust, Keanu Reeves drove his motorcycle through the desolate streets. The air was thick, burning his throat with every breath. He had seen disasters before, but this was different. It wasn't just a fire. It was an unstoppable force, a devourer of life itself. He had been on his way home when he saw it. The apartment complex at the end of the street, flames curling up its walls, glass windows shattering under the heat. People were running in all directions, some covered in soot, others clutching what little they had managed to save. A woman stood in the middle of the chaos, screaming. "My daughter! She's still inside." Keanu didn't think. He never did in moments like these. Instinct overrode everything. He pulled his bike to a screeching halt, throwing off his helmet, eyes locked on the inferno swallowing the building. The fire department was stretched too thin. There was no one coming. No one fast enough. He sprinted toward the entrance, barely registering the hands that tried to stop him. The heat hit him like a solid wall, blistering even through his jacket. The hallway was filled with smoke, thick and rolling, suffocating. He dropped low, crawling under it, listening for any sound over the roar of the fire. A faint cry, high-pitched, a child. He moved faster, ignoring the searing pain in his lungs, the sweat stinging his eyes. The stairs were gone, devoured by fire, leaving only the elevator shaft as a possible route. A risk, but there was no time to hesitate. Gripping the sides of the shaft, he began to climb, every movement sending debris tumbling into the darkness below. His muscles screamed, his grip slipping on the metal slick with sweat. The fire raged around him, snapping and crackling like something alive, something hungry. A scream, closer this time. The child. He pulled himself up to the third floor, kicking open the remains of a door. The room was an oven. Furniture smoldered, walls peeled away in blackened layers. And there, in the far corner, curled up beneath a table, was a little girl. She wasn't crying anymore. She was too scared to move. Keanu moved toward her, every step calculated, every breath measured. The floor creaked beneath him, weakened by the fire. He crouched low, reaching out. "It's okay," he rasped. "I got you." The girl hesitated for a moment, then scrambled into his arms, clutching at his jacket with tiny, soot-covered fingers. He wrapped his jacket around her, shielding her from the worst of the heat. The exit was gone. The hallway had collapsed behind him. There was only one way out. The window. He could see the street below, firefighters just arriving, their sirens drowned out by the roar of the inferno. Too late. He kicked at the glass once, twice, until it shattered outward, sending shards raining down onto the pavement. The drop was too far, even for him. But then he saw it. The fire escape, barely holding on, its metal rusted and warped from the heat. No choice. Holding the girl tight, he leaped, landing hard, the impact rattling his bones. The fire escape groaned under the weight, bolts popping, metal shifting. It wouldn't hold much longer. He moved fast, too fast, nearly slipping as the metal twisted beneath him. The last ladder was stuck. No time to force it. He braced himself, tightening his grip on the girl, and jumped. They hit the ground hard. Pain shot up his leg, but he didn't let go. He rolled, shielding the girl from the worst of it. Above them, the fire escape gave way, crashing to the ground where they had stood seconds before. The girl was crying, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Hands pulled them up, firefighters, paramedics. The mother was there, sobbing, thanking him over and over. Keanu barely heard her. His body ached, lungs burning, skin singed, but he only had one thought. The girl had made it. That was all that mattered. As the cameras flashed, as the world caught wind of what had happened, Keanu Reeves simply turned away, disappearing into the chaos, just as he had arrived. No interviews, no credit, just the knowledge that for once he had been exactly where he needed to be. And for him, that was enough. The chaos had barely begun to settle when Keanu Reeves slipped away from the scene, unnoticed by most. The little girl was safe, wrapped in her mother's embrace, as paramedics checked her over. Firefighters still battled the flames, their silhouettes framed against the glowing inferno that continued to consume the apartment complex. But Keanu had no reason to stay. He never did. He had done what needed to be done, and now he vanished into the night like a ghost. His hands ached, his body bore the marks of his reckless escape, but the adrenaline masked most of the pain. He walked briskly, weaving through the panicked crowds, stepping over debris and past scorched cars left abandoned in the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the heavy, smoke-filled air. The sky remained a dark orange, thick with ashes that rained down like an apocalyptic snowfall. The fires were spreading, jumping from building to building, feeding on the dry Los Angeles air. Keanu had seen disasters before, but nothing quite like this. It was a city on the edge of destruction, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, feeling the fabric singed and torn in places, the scent of burning wood and chemicals clinging to his clothes. Every breath stung, the soot coating the inside of his throat like fine dust. He needed to get out of here, needed to get somewhere safe. But as he turned a corner, he caught sight of something that made him freeze. A woman, standing in the middle of the street, her face illuminated by the glow of the fire behind her. She wasn't running, wasn't screaming like the others. She was staring wide-eyed, frozen in place. In her arms, a bundle, small, wrapped in cloth, unmoving. Keanu didn't hesitate. He ran to her, his voice hoarse. "Come on, you have to move." The woman barely reacted. She was in shock, her grip tightening around the bundle in her arms. Keanu reached out, shaking her lightly, forcing her to focus on him. "We need to go now?" Finally, she blinked, her body jerking to life as realization hit. She nodded, following him as he led her away from the worst of the blaze. Behind them, a car exploded, the blast sending a wave of heat through the air, nearly knocking them off their feet. Keanu shielded her as best he could, guiding her into an alleyway where the smoke wasn't as thick. She was trembling, coughing, her arms still wrapped tightly around whatever she carried. Keanu glanced down. A baby, barely a few months old. Its face was smudged with soot, but its tiny chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. "We need to get to the paramedics," he told her. "They're back that way." She shook her head violently. "No, I can't. I can't go back there." Keanu didn't press her. There wasn't time. More explosions sounded in the distance, the fire spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. He looked up. Power lines dangled dangerously above them, sparks raining down onto the cracked pavement. The alley wasn't safe either. They had to keep moving. He took her hand and pulled her along, ignoring the protests, the fear in her eyes. It didn't matter. She needed to live. The baby needed to live. They ran, through the thickest parts of the smoke, through streets littered with wreckage, past abandoned vehicles and collapsed structures. The city had turned into a war zone, and every second counted. Keanu's body screamed in protest, but he pushed through, knowing that stopping wasn't an option. The fire was relentless, and it didn't care who it took with it. They reached a highway, its once busy lanes now empty save for the burnt-out remains of cars that had been caught in the blaze. The air shimmered with heat, the pavement beneath them cracked and unstable. Across the road, Keanu spotted an emergency shelter set up by the firefighters. People were gathering there, seeking refuge from the chaos. They just had to get across. A deep, guttural groan echoed from somewhere nearby. The woman clutched the baby closer, her eyes darting around in terror. Keanu followed her gaze, his stomach tightening at what he saw. A building, one of the tallest in the area, its foundation weakened by the relentless fire, was beginning to collapse. The support beams buckled, the structure leaning at a dangerous angle. It was only a matter of moments before it came down, and they were right in its path. Keanu didn't think. He acted. Grabbing the woman, he hauled her forward, forcing their tired bodies to move faster than they thought possible. Every step felt like a battle, every breath a struggle against the suffocating heat. Behind them, the groaning intensified, metal screeching as the building gave way. They were so close. Just a few more feet. A deafening roar filled the air as the structure finally gave in, a monstrous wave of debris crashing down, swallowing the street behind them in an avalanche of concrete and fire. The force of the impact sent them sprawling, dust and smoke engulfing them in a suffocating cloud. Keanu covered the woman and the baby with his own body, shielding them from the worst of it. Silence followed. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes after destruction, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was their ragged breathing, the faint crackling of flames still licking at what remained of the buildings around them. Keanu pushed himself up, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through his ribs. The woman coughed violently, her grip on the baby never loosening. They were alive. That was all that mattered. He turned his gaze toward the emergency shelter. It was still there, still intact. They had made it. Somehow, against all odds, they had made it. Keanu helped the woman to her feet, supporting her as they stumbled the last few feet to safety. People rushed forward, hands reaching out, pulling them into the fold of the survivors. Medics swarmed around them, voices overlapping in a haze of urgency. He watched as the woman and her baby were taken inside, disappearing into the crowd. She looked back at him once, eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place, gratitude, disbelief, something deeper. But then she was gone. Keanu took a breath, then another. The weight of exhaustion settled over him, his body finally demanding what it had been denied. He turned, stepping away from the shelter, away from the cameras and the murmured voices of those who had started to notice him. As he walked back into the burning city, disappearing once again into the chaos, there was only one thought on his mind. It wasn't over yet. The city was a battlefield of smoke and flames. Every street, every alley, every familiar landmark was now barely recognizable under the weight of destruction. Keanu moved through the haze like a shadow, his footsteps muffled by the layers of ash coating the pavement. The fires had spread overnight, pushed forward by relentless winds. Entire blocks had been swallowed, leaving nothing but skeletal remains of buildings and the occasional flickering neon sign that still clung to life, buzzing with useless electricity. The emergency shelters were overflowing. First responders stretched to their breaking points. The city needed help. And Keanu, he couldn't walk away. Not yet. He had been moving for hours, navigating through collapsed streets, dodging fallen power lines, and avoiding the growing number of looters who had taken advantage of the chaos. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was people. Desperation turned into violence, survival instincts overriding morality. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the distant sirens and the crackling flames. Faint at first, a cry. He stopped, listening, heart pounding. Another cry. Closer. He turned the corner, his boots kicking up dust and debris. The fire had reached the old commercial district, turning boutiques and restaurants into smoldering ruins. And there, in the middle of the street, a collapsed building. Smoke poured from the wreckage, but from beneath the twisted steel and shattered glass. Movement. A child. Trapped. Keanu didn't think. He ran. The structure groaned as it settled, threatening to collapse further. He climbed over the wreckage, hands bleeding as he pushed aside sharp edges and burning debris. The heat was unbearable, but he kept moving. The child was small, barely 5 or 6, pinned under a heavy beam. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wide with terror. Keanu braced himself and lifted. Every muscle in his body screamed as he forced the beam up just enough to drag the boy free. The moment he did, the wreckage gave way, crumbling into the abyss of fire below. Holding the boy close, he moved fast, coughing through the smoke. The air was thick, impossible to breathe. The flames licked closer, hungrily consuming anything left standing. There was no way back the way he had come. The only way out was forward. Keanu sprinted down the fractured street, dodging falling debris, shielding the boy from flying embers. A gas station up ahead was on the verge of explosion, its metal frame twisted from the heat. He had seconds to act. He spotted an overturned delivery truck, its cargo spilled across the road. Cases of bottled water, shattered glass, and a half-melted plastic tarp. He made a choice. He ran for the truck, climbing onto the hood just as the gas station erupted behind them. The shockwave sent a blast of fire rolling toward them. Without hesitation, Keanu wrapped himself around the boy and jumped. The world became a blur of heat and motion. He hit the pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Fire and smoke consumed the space where they had been just moments before. The boy was crying now, his tiny fingers gripping Keanu's jacket. But he was alive. That was all that mattered. Keanu staggered to his feet, scanning the horizon. They weren't safe yet. The fires raged in all directions, cutting off the clear exits. He had to think. Fast. Then he saw it, a fire truck in the distance, its emergency lights barely visible through the haze. Firefighters were working tirelessly, directing civilians toward an evacuation zone. He picked up the boy and ran. Each step felt heavier than the last. His body screamed for rest, his lungs burned with every breath, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The boy's safety was the only thing that mattered. The ground trembled beneath him as another building collapsed in the distance. Smoke billowed higher, turning the sky a permanent shade of gray. He pushed forward. When he finally reached the fire truck, hands pulled them both to safety. Firefighters swarmed, tending to the boy, checking his wounds, asking questions. Keanu barely registered any of it. He took a step back, watching as the child was carried to an ambulance, his small fingers still clutching Keanu's sleeve until they gently pried them away. The mother was there, sobbing, grateful. She held her son so tightly, as if she would never let go. Their eyes met, and for a moment, there was nothing but silent understanding. Then, just like before, Keanu turned away. He disappeared into the smoke, into the chaos, into the city that still needed him. It wasn't over yet. Not until the fire was gone. Not until the last person was safe. And Keanu Reeves, he wasn't done saving lives.